welcome back to my channel. My name is Andy. I hope you're doing really well wherever or whenever in the world that you are. Welcome to the video. Today we're going to be chatting all about my January reads, all the books that I read in January, and believe me, there were quite a few books. In fact, I read 22 books in the month of January, which is a lot. But what can I say? I really got into the groove, I built some momentum, and I was just really in the mood. I just couldn't stop reading. So without further ado, let us begin. The first book that I read in January was Ice and Ivy by J.D. Evans. This is the fourth full installment in the Mages of the Wheel series. I read this, I started it in December because the audiobook became available at the very end of December, and I've been waiting, and so I finally got to listen to the book that I've read a few times. The audio was amazing. I loved every second of it. It was so good to be back in the world, and this fourth book, Ice and Ivy, is like one of my favorite couples, and so I just had the best time. I loved it. It was the best way to end 2024 and begin 2025. I loved it. 5 stars. I would give it more stars. I should give it more stars. 6 stars. The next book that I read, I sort of picked up the second book in a series, not really realizing it was in a series. And I was very, very confused. I said, oh, let's go back. And so that's what I did. And I started the Wild Wynchesters series. It's a historical romance series where you're following this very quirky family, and each book follows one of the siblings. And all of the siblings were adopted by the same guy. And so they're different ages, different races, different nationalities, different, childhood experiences. And so each book feels really unique, but also in the spirit of this very whimsy, silly, ridiculous, loyal, loving family. Overall, I've read, I think 4 books in the series. It's going to be 6. I think the 6th book in the series comes out maybe sometime in 2025 or 2026. I've listened to all the ones available on audio, so that's kind of my roadblock. The first book is The Duke Heist. This was probably my favorite. You get introduced to the oldest of the siblings, or the one who was adopted first, and her romance. And then the next one is The Perks of Loving a Wallflower. I had mentioned this book specifically from Reading Roulette as a romance with a really long title. I didn't really end up reading it for that Reading Roulette prompt, but I picked it up nonetheless. The third one is Nobody's Princess. And then the fourth one is My Rogue to Ruin. And they're just each really fun. I would recommend actually reading them in order because the family does have a pretty chaotic dynamic. And I think if you just jumped in on books 2, 3, or 4 or beyond, I think it wouldn't land. I don't think you would like it as much. I think it would feel confusing and overwhelming. So I would probably read them in order. I really enjoyed it that way. I definitely think the first one was my favorite, but they're all really feel good. I laughed out loud in each installment. It's just a really heartwarming feel good time. And each one sort of has a mystery subplot, which I always think is really fun in historicals. The next book that I read in January was Wolfsong by T.J. Klune. My sister's boyfriend actually got this for me for Christmas, basically because he got me the special edition from Barnes & Noble with the sprayed edges. And it was on my want to read on my want to read list. Well, that was a mouthful. It was so thoughtful. And so I read it, and I have mixed feelings about this book. I gave it 3.5 stars because there were definitely things I really liked and appreciated, and then there were things that didn't really work for me. So let's start with the good. I loved Ox. He's one of the main characters, and I think he has a really fascinating and well-developed character arc throughout the story. You follow these characters over a pretty long time. I think I don't know if it's 10 years, but it feels like a long time that you're meeting them when they're younger and then kind of following them into young adulthood. I thought his story and his character development was excellent. I really grew to like him. I grew to understand him. I really think he's interesting, multi-dimensional character. Did I say that right? I really liked that. I liked some of the world building. In this world, there are obviously werewolves, and it really dives into the lore of werewolves, which I thought was really interesting. I definitely think there are parts that are very well paced, and there's an element of that I can't stop reading, page turner experience. And I liked some of the side characters. I do think there's a lot of humor in this story, and I think some of the side characters, their main job is to lighten some of the tension that's going on throughout the story. So there were a lot of things that I enjoyed. The two main things that I really struggled with was Ox and Joe's relationship. I struggled with the age gap. These two meet when they're young. I think Joe is like maybe 11 and Ox is like a teenager, so he's like 15 or 16. And I just didn't like how this book kind of handled their romantic interest even when they're young because of the age difference, and it just like brings up stuff around consent for me. Obviously, like nothing happens that's sexually inappropriate or anything when they're underage, but it just, I'm not sure, it just gave me a little bit of the ick and I felt a little uncomfortable by it. So if age gap, especially like when the characters meet when they're young, bothers you, I could see this rubbing people the wrong way. But I think I'm in the minority. I think most people really love and adore this romance. It just didn't quite work for me. And a big part of that is I don't particularly like Joe as a character. He feels really immature throughout the story. Like even as he gets older, he still reads to me like he's 12 years old. I don't think he has as meaningful of a character arc and development as Ox does. And so I think that's why their romance like doesn't work for me, because to me, Ox grows a lot and Joe doesn't. So I don't find it believable that they would still be like drawn to each other or interested in each other. I like understand some of the lore and like it's not fated mates, but like I get it, but I don't. It just didn't quite work for me. And I do think there are some pacing issues. I think there are some parts of this story that really, like, it was a slog to get through. It really dragged. I kept like checking to see how many pages were left in a chapter. So I kind of felt like I was getting whiplash throughout the story, where there are times that felt perfectly paced, and then the opposite, where there were times where I felt it completely dragged, or things happened all of a sudden and it was rushed and didn't feel worth it. So all in all, yeah, like I said, just like mixed feelings. I don't think I'll continue on in the series. I think the series stays in the same like community and the same character group, but you follow other romantic pairings, I think. I think I'll probably stop here, but I'm glad that I read it. I think it's a really interesting book, and I definitely think I'm in the minority of not loving it, because a lot of people that I see on Goodreads are obsessed and they think it's like one of their favorite romances. So I think if it's something you're interested in, give it a try. It just wasn't perfect for me. I gave it 3.5 stars. I also picked up Wolfsong for my reading roulette game. I got fantasy romance on my physical shelf. Was that the prompt? Let me double check. Yeah, fantasy romance on my physical TBR. So love that. The next book that I read in January was An Extraordinary Union by Alyssa Cole. I picked this up because from reading roulette, I like spun the lost prompts, and one of my forgotten reading roulette prompts from previous months was a historical romance TBR vet, and so this was the perfect one. This has been on my TBR for a really, really long time, probably like 5 or 6 years, and I'm so glad that I finally picked it up. I absolutely loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars, but it definitely was one of my favorites from the month, so I could see me maybe making it a 5-star if it still sticks with me as much as it has at this moment in time. It's really good. I think that the plot is fascinating. The relationship at the center of the story is really interesting and well developed, and it's paced really well. Like I think I might have read it in one sitting. I was like on the edge of my seat. I couldn't stop. I loved being in this world, being with these characters. It was great. This story takes place during the Civil War, and both of our central main characters, Elle and Malcolm, are undercover spies or agents for the Union. Elle is a former slave, kind of posting undercover at this plantation, and Malcolm is this like white guy he's Scottish, but he's a white guy and he's trying to infiltrate the Confederate army. And they kind of meet by literally bumping into each other at the plantation, the house that Elle works in. And yeah, it's kind of a forbidden romance. It's really good. There's a lot of tension, both in the plot and in the relationship. There's a lot of mutual pining. There's like real conflict and like real stakes. And it's just so good. My only like quarrel with this book is Malcolm is Scottish and the narrator doesn't do a Scottish accent. So that was kind of a letdown. But other than that, It's like perfection. So good. So good. All right. Next in January, I binged the Bonds That Tie series by byeee. I'll put a picture of like all 6 books up here. And here are my overall thoughts. I think this is a really fun, it's a very lusty series. And I had a really good time with it, especially in the earlier installments. It just felt a little drawn out towards the end. Like, I think the 4th, 5th, and 6th books could have been one book. Like, it felt a little too drawn out, and I was kind of like feeling impatient towards the end of like, okay, I just like need to see how this wraps up. It just felt a little bit too long. Essentially, you're following the main character, Ollie or Oleander, and the premise of the first book is very much giving like Sky High, you know, that like Disney Channel movie where they go to high school and they all have their own magical powers. Kind of like Sky High meets X-Men. And it is interesting, like the magic systems and like that magical element within this series is really fascinating. And it's a reverse harem situation where like in this world, there are centers, I think that's what they're called. And they have like groups of people who are into them. So all of the relationships are polyamorous. And so our main girl, I think, has, oh my God, how many mates does she have? Or how many bonds does she have? Maybe 5? Oh gosh, I kind of forget. But anyways, it's like her and like 5 or 6 guys like all in the same bond. And the beginning installments are really fun because like none of them really get along. So not only is there a lot of intrigue in the like bigger plot, the world building, the school, learning about everyone's magical abilities, but like there's a lot of tension and angst within the bonded relationships, which makes it such a compelling read. Later on in the series, like everyone starts to get along, and so that element of intrigue goes away, and so you're just relying on kind of like the big baddies and the bigger plot, which again, like didn't need to be 2 or 3 full books. So overall, I think it's really fun. I had a good time. Like I was happy to read it. I was like giggling and teeheeing, and I was definitely gripped for a lot of it. But yeah, I've said it 1,000 times already. It was just a little long. I gave Broken Bonds, which is the first book, 3.5 stars. Savage Bonds was definitely my favorite one. That's the second book. I gave it 4 stars. Then Blood Bonds, Forced Bonds, Tragic Bonds, I gave 3.5 stars to all of those. And then the final book in the series is Unbroken Bonds, and I gave that 3 stars. It was a little bit of a letdown, to be honest. Next, I started reading for the Rake meets the Bluestocking historical romance readathon. So these next 3 books I picked up for that. I was hoping to get a bingo, and I just missed because I couldn't read whatever I was going for. I'll put a picture of my board. I was going for like 4 across, and I just didn't get that 4th book read, which is fine. The first book I picked up, I killed 2 birds with 1 stone. It was Garden of Lies by Amanda Quick. This met the prompt, I think, new to me author for the historical romance readathon, and it was the buzzword reading challenge for Truth and Lies, because Garden of Lies, which is great. I love those conveniences. This is a classic like historical romance mystery combo, and the main girl is convinced that her friend who dies, it's actually a murder, and like for reasons. The guy, I don't remember either of these characters' names. That tells you how much it stuck with me. They work together to like solve the mystery of the murder, and of course like they unravel a bigger scheme going on. And this was fine. I gave it 3 stars. It was just boring. I didn't feel particularly invested in the world or the relationship. I thought the relationship pacing was really off. Like they're kind of like barely strangers, and then they're like having sex, and I was like, whoa, that happened out of nowhere. Like I didn't believe their chemistry. Sorry if you can hear Francis in her litter box. I didn't believe any of their chemistry. Like the pacing of their relationship felt really rushed and unbelievable. And the mystery was like, fine. I could take it or leave it. Like it was just okay. I'm not mad that I picked this up, but I definitely don't think I would ever reread it. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend it. And I don't know that I'll pick up more from Amanda Quick. It was really just okay. It made me wish that I was reading the Veronica Speedwell mystery series, because it was like going for that banter, and it just kind of was like hitting a foul ball. Like it wasn't quite there in the way that I wanted it to be. It was fine. Next, for my Rake meets the Bluestocking Readathon marathon, I read A Scandal in July by Kate Bateman. This is one of the novellas in her Ruthless Rivals series, a series that I love, but this was a little bit of a letdown. I was really disappointed. I think the problem with this is that it's a novella. It's just too short. Even though these families have been feuding for generations, this particular dynamic felt very insta-lovey to me, which is not my favorite. Yeah, everything just felt rushed. Like, I felt like I just wanted more time with them. I wanted more banter. The main plot is that the family, it's like Aunt Prudence's birthday, and she's created this very extravagant scavenger hunt game for all of the couples to play. So of course our two main characters are pushed together because they're on the same team. And I loved that forced proximity. It was really fun. But I wanted more to come out of the game. There are definitely silly moments where I was giggling and really enjoying myself. But then I was sad. It ended too quickly. It just didn't feel like there was enough time to make it a worthwhile romance. I definitely didn't feel like it had that enemies to lovers or rivals to lovers relationship dynamic that a lot of the earlier installments in this series have had. And yeah, it was just okay. I gave it 3.5 stars. It's a quick read. It's fun. It's definitely entertaining and enjoyable. It just fell a little flat, I guess. I don't understand the title. A Scandal in July, but what was the scandal? Did I miss something? That's a little nitpicky, but it's something that bothered me. Alrighty, next I picked up The Secret Service of Tea and Treason by India Holton. What? I don't know what prompt this was. What was this? Oh, it had fantasy elements in it. This was fun. I didn't realize it was part of a series. It was the third book in a little trilogy. In hindsight, I sort of wish that I had read the previous books because those characters show up in this story, and I felt a little I realized I wasn't getting it, because their cameos didn't land the same as if I had watched those earlier couples fall in love. So I do feel that probably affected a little bit of my enjoyment because as those cameos come up, I didn't feel as excited as I would if I had probably read those stories. But in general, this was a good time. It feels very much like Mr. and Mrs. Smith meets the Veronica Speedwell mystery series, but with witches and pirates. It was really a good time. There's a lot of really funny banter. The pacing is good. It's a lot of adventuring, and I had a good time. The pirate shenanigans are funny. Alice and Bixby's relationship is very charming. And the humor and banter, like I said, was pretty delightful. I think like I said, I just didn't feel fully invested, and there were times where I was a little bit bored or a little bit confused. So I think I landed on 3.5 stars, but it was a really fun time. I would definitely consider picking up more from this author. The world was very cool, and I really enjoyed myself. It was a fast read, so that was good. Next up in January, I began my reread of the Empyrean series by Rebecca Yarros. I reread Fourth Wing and Iron Flame in preparation for Onyx Storm being released. And here are my thoughts. I loved my reread of Fourth Wing. I forgot how fun and fast-paced that first book is. I love getting introduced into the world and just the chaos that is that school. Nothing about that school makes sense, but whatever. I just forgot how much angst there is in the first book. It was a really, really fun time. Is it the best book ever written? Absolutely not. There are so many problematic things, and plot conveniences, but it's fun. It's a fun, entertaining time. Then I jumped right into Iron Flame, and I liked Iron Flame, I think, more on this reread than I did originally. I just think it's a little long. I feel the pacing of Iron Flame is off, but I genuinely had a good time. I was really enjoying myself in both of those books, in Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, and I was very excited to pick up Onyx Storm, and I didn't like Onyx Storm. I'm disappointed. I feel underwhelmed and sad and just kind of meh. There were a few things about Onyx Storm that I liked. I enjoyed getting to know the Venin a little bit better. You get a little more insight into what's going on over there with the Venin creatures. So I found that to be pretty interesting. There are a few unexpected twists throughout, which is fun. And I do think Violet has a few like very cool, like badass moments, which, you know, I always appreciate. But in general, this book felt so convoluted and confusing for no reason. And I purposefully reread Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, so like the characters, the world, the magic, like everything was fresh in my mind. And even with that, I was lost in the sauce. There are so many references to characters that are either not very important and just like vaguely alluded to in the earlier books, or are new. And there's so many places that are referred to as if we're supposed to know these places, but they definitely have not come up before. So I just felt like that created so much unnecessary confusion, and it really took me out of the story and made me feel frustrated, like pretty much from page 1. I had to like look up on Instagram and Google like maps and character lists as someone who just read the first 2 books, which makes no sense. Like, that's not how it's supposed to be. This book did not feel very well written. It needed to be shorter. It felt really drawn out. I really didn't like this. I also felt like there were some reveals that came out throughout this book that felt really underwhelming. Like, they try to paint it as this big deal, and I don't understand why it's a big deal, and I still don't. The ending also like made no sense. I'm sure I could like watch a video or go on a Reddit forum or whatever, but like, why am I this confused about about a book? I don't know. And also, like I mentioned, that Violet does have some like pretty cool, like badass moments. But the hard thing is like, they didn't really feel believable to me. Like, they didn't feel true to like the Violet I know. Like, I loved it and I was like, yeah, get it, girl. Like, woo, you're so smart. But I was also like, this would never happen in her. Like, she would never outsmart these people in this way. So it did feel a little like eye rolly, and I just knocked my camera a little. It just felt really unbelievable and just kind of like, okay, sure. Also, this is a very little nitpicky thing, but towards the end, there's like a big battle-y scene, and Rebecca Yarros writes the word desiccates like 1,000 times, but every time the audiobook narrator would say it, I thought that she was pronouncing it as defecates, and it was really distracting. I was just like, what is happening? Why is everyone defecating all over the place? Anyways, I think I'll probably read the next book, but like, I'm not very excited. I want to know like how this storyline is going to end up, but I also don't care. We'll have to see. I gave Onyx Storm 2.5 stars, maybe 3. Definitely a letdown. On the plus side, I then read Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and I loved it, which was great. I buddy read this with my sister, and I picked it up from my reading roulette game because I had to read a science fiction book with Andy somewhere, like in the title, in the author's name, or like in a main character. And, you know, obviously like Andy Weir. It's spelled differently, but you know, we made it work. I loved this book. If you've read previous Andy Weir books, a common like criticism I read was that it feels very similar. Like, I think some of the like internal monologue, bantery stuff and sciencey stuff like feels very reminiscent of The Martian. But I didn't read The Martian, so I was having the best time. I thought the humor throughout the story was really, really good. There's like a main friendship at the center of the story that I found so charming. There's a really unique audio element. So if you can, I would highly, highly, highly recommend listening to the audiobook. It was very cool. And I just had a really good time being like in this sci-fi world. My eyes and ears definitely like glazed over for a lot of the sciencey stuff. And you just kind of have to suspend disbelief and just like go with it, because like, how does this high school science teacher know every single thing that there ever was about science in space? Like, it's very convenient, but whatever. Like, if you put that aside, it's just like a really good time. Like I said, I love the little friendship. Rocky is everything to me. And it was just a really good time. It's also going to be adapted into a movie eventually. And I think Ryan Gosling is going to be the main guy. and I can't wait. That should be really fun. Overall, this story was really heartwarming, really charming, and I just really enjoyed myself. I could see why it's been people's favorite books that they've read in years past, or like last year or the year before, because it was really, really good. All right, last two books. I next picked up Parable of the Brown Girl by Christy Lauren Adams. This I also picked up because of the Buzz cover challenge. There's sort of like a repeating pattern situation on the cover, and I really enjoyed this. I got to like informally, I didn't meet the author, but the author came to speak at a work event a few years ago, and so we all got this book, and she was a very fascinating, charismatic speaker, and so I'm glad that I finally got to pick this up. It was really good. I think this is gonna land differently for different people. She is a pastor or a reverend, maybe, and so there are a lot of references to scripture, to Bible verses that I think some people will find really meaningful. I am not religious and I'm not Christian, and so for me it kind of just like went over my head, and like I tried to just think more about like the metaphor of the Bible verses, which is maybe what everyone's doing, but like that element didn't really land for me. But I still think there are a lot of really important, insightful, thought-provoking takeaways as she shares these different stories. Basically, she's writing these 6 different parables that illuminate a different, often overlooked experience or struggle or challenge for Black and brown girls, especially in the United States. And I think there are a lot of themes that, again, are going to really connect with a lot of people. And I think it's really well written. I think it's really insightful and definitely makes you think about racism at large and microaggressions and the unique experience of being a Black and brown girl in girlhood and growing up. And it was just really, really fascinating. I'm so glad that I read it. And I feel like I've never heard anyone in like the BookTube book talk space talk about it. So if you're looking for something in this realm, I definitely think it's a great, fascinating read. It's also very short, but there's a lot of value. So it's a quick but really meaningful read. As I'm like thinking about this book, one of the themes that really, really stood out to me was how important being accepted and seen and valued for exactly as you are, who you are, is so important in this life. Whether it's like within your family, within your friend group, within community, religion, wherever, like finding a place where you are accepted for exactly as you are is like one of the most powerful, healing, moving things that like we can have in our lives. And I love that was kind of weaved throughout all of her different parables, all of her different stories. It was just really moving. I thought it was so good. Yeah, really highly recommend. I think I gave it 4 stars, 3.5, 4 stars. But again, I think depending on how like the scripture is going to land with you, I could see this being even more impactful, truly. The last book that I read in January was This Will Only Hurt a Little by Busy Phillips. This is her memoir. I picked this up for Reading Roulette for a nonfiction with a feeling word in the title. I was using hurt as the feeling word title. It's gonna work for now. And I think if you're gonna pick this up, I highly recommend it. It was a great time. Definitely pick up the audio. Busy Phillips narrates it herself, and she's just a very animated, charismatic narrator, and she like obviously like has accents for all the people in her family and people in her lives, and I just thought her narration was like stellar. This memoir definitely hits some heavier topics, but it's packaged in this very digestible way. It definitely feels like you're just sitting at a coffee shop with Busy Phillips, like sharing stories about your lives. It feels very like friendly and casual, and very captivating, and just like, you know, like we're just chatting, which I haven't read very many memoirs in that kind of style. I really liked it. It was very easy to read. As always, like I definitely found the stories about like her experience in Hollywood really interesting. I loved hearing about the friendships like with other famous actors and actresses that I totally didn't know about. I loved getting insight into like how those friendships were formed, like when, and I just loved getting kind of like a glimpse into just like the more intimate side of like famous people's lives. That sounds kind of shitty, but I don't know another way to describe it. I just think it helps remind us, like the public at large, that like these are fully humans with lives, like deep, meaningful lives and real feelings. And I think there's a tendency, especially in like US Western society, to like really glamorize celebrities. And I think this brings this memoir, but memoirs like this like really brings an element of like humanity back into like, these are just people. And I loved getting insight into her life and her family and her friendships and her professional and personal stories. Like, they were all really interesting, very relatable. I mean, I'm obviously not a celebrity, but you know, there are still ways that you can connect. And yeah, I just thought it was really good. It was a good time. It was really interesting, very captivating. And again, she's a phenomenal narrator. So I thought that was great. Woo! I feel like I've been chatting for 5 years. I've been talking for almost 40 minutes at this point. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I don't know how long this video is going to be because I did get a little rambly at parts, so I may have chopped a few things out here and there. But yeah, overall, I had a really, really solid reading month. When I look back at like my TBR stuff, I did really great. I read my Buzz cover, my Buzz word. I participated in the Rake meets the Duke historical romance. I didn't get a bingo, but I'm proud of like how I tried my very best. And from reading roulette, I read my fantasy romance on my physical TBR because I read Wolfsong by TJ Klune. I read a historical romance TBR vet because that was a lost prompt. For that, I picked up An Extraordinary Union. I read a science fiction with Andy somewhere in the story because I read Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I am currently in the middle of a romance with a long title, although I did read like a couple of the ones that I mentioned from my TBR video. I did read those, but I'm currently in the middle of a love song for Ricky Wilde. I'm about halfway done there. So I'm gonna count that as like a success because like I will be done with it very soon. I read a nonfiction with a feeling word in the title because I read Busy Phillips' memoir. The only one I didn't get to was a historical fiction with a color word in the title. I was hoping to pick up The Color Purple and it just didn't happen. So that one will go back into the lost prompt jar and we'll begin again. Overall, like I said, I had a really good reading month. I had a lot of fun. I read a nice balance of like silly, cheesy, entertaining things and thought-provoking, insightful things. That was my January reading. If you made it this far, go ahead and leave a little snow emoji just to let me know you made it to the end. I'd love to hear about what you guys read in January, any highlights, any flops. Have you read Onyx Storm? If you have, I would love to know what you thought about it. Am I in the minority? I don't know, I'm curious to hear. So I'm wishing you all the very best. If you are new here and haven't already, please consider liking, subscribing, like doing all the YouTube things. It really helps my channel. If you're returning, thank you so much for coming back. It's so great to chat with you guys in the comments and just to, you know, kind of be with you through the internet week to week. Anyways, that's all. I'm rambling a little. I hope you have a good rest of your day and happy reading. See you next time. Bye.